Before we begin, if you believe that truth always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you're about to hear will stay with you for a long time. What would you do if the entire system was against you? What would you do if the judge, the jury, the opposing counsel, everyone in that courtroom, had already decided you were going to lose before you even opened your mouth? Would you give up? Would you accept defeat? Or would you fight with everything you had, knowing that one piece of evidence could change everything? Tonight's story is about Maya Richardson, a young black lawyer from the south side of Chicago who took on a case that everyone said was impossible, a case against one of the most powerful corporations in America, a case that would put her career, her reputation, and her life on the line. It's about Judge Harold Whitmore, a man who had spent 30 years on the bench, who had built his career on connections and compromises, and who was about to learn that some secrets don't stay buried forever. It's about a recording, 3 minutes and 47 seconds, that would expose corruption at the highest levels, destroy careers built on lies, and prove that justice, real justice, doesn't care about money or power or connections. But I warn you, this story has moments that will make your blood boil. What happens in Chapter 6 will leave you speechless, and the ending will restore your faith in the power of truth. Stay with me until the end. Let's begin. The law offices of Richardson and Associates occupied a small storefront on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't much to look at. A converted retail space with second-hand furniture, fluorescent lights that flickered when the wind blew too hard, and a heating system that worked only when it felt like it. The sign outside was hand-painted, the letters slightly uneven, a testament to the limited budget that had launched the firm 3 years ago. But to Maya Richardson, it was everything. At 32 years old, Maya had already lived several lifetimes, born to a teenage mother who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, raised in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong, told by every guidance counselor, every teacher, every authority figure that girls like her didn't become lawyers. She had proved them all wrong. Full scholarship to the University of Chicago, top of her class at Northwestern Law, offers from every major firm in the city, offers she had turned down to open her own practice, to serve the community that had raised her, to be the lawyer she had needed when she was a child and couldn't afford one. Her clients weren't corporations or wealthy individuals. They were single mothers fighting evictions, workers denied their wages, families destroyed by a system that seemed designed to crush them. She won more cases than she lost, but the victories were small, the fees barely enough to keep the lights on. Then Maria Santos walked through her door. Maria was 43 years old, a cleaning woman who had worked at Hartwell Industries for 15 years. She was small, soft-spoken, with hands roughened by years of scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets. She spoke with a slight accent. Her family had immigrated from Mexico when she was 12, and she clutched a folder of documents like it was a lifeline. "They fired me," Maria said, her voice trembling. "After 15 years, they said I stole from them, but I didn't steal anything. Miss Richardson, I swear on my children's lives." Maya listened as Maria told her story. Hartwell Industries was a pharmaceutical giant, one of the largest in the country, with revenues in the billions, and a legal team that had never lost a case. Maria had worked in their Chicago headquarters, part of the cleaning crew that came in after hours to empty trash cans and vacuum carpets. 3 weeks ago, she'd been called into the security office. They accused her of stealing confidential documents. They showed her footage, grainy, unclear, of someone who might have been her near a filing cabinet. They gave her a choice: resign quietly or be prosecuted. Maria had refused to resign. She knew she was innocent. She had never stolen anything in her life, so they fired her. And then they did something worse. They reported her to immigration authorities. Maria's green card was valid. Her status was legal, but the accusation alone was enough to trigger an investigation, to put her family under scrutiny, to threaten everything she had built over 30 years in this country. "I have 4 children," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "2 of them are in college. If I get deported, if my husband gets deported, everything we worked for." Maya felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest, the fire that had driven her through law school, through the bar exam, through every obstacle the world had thrown in her path. "Do you have any idea why they would target you specifically?" Maya asked. Maria hesitated. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a piece of paper. "I found this," she said quietly, "in a trash can I was emptying. I know I shouldn't have kept it, but something told me it was important." Maya took the paper and read it. Her blood ran cold. It was an internal memo dated 6 months ago, marked confidential, discussing a drug called Nexapril. The memo detailed serious side effects that had been discovered in clinical trials, side effects that had been hidden from the FDA, side effects that had already killed 17 people. "Maria," Maya said slowly, "do you understand what this is?" "I think so. They're hiding something bad, aren't they? Something that's hurting people." Maya nodded, her mind racing. This wasn't just a wrongful termination case anymore. This was a cover-up, a conspiracy, the kind of case that could bring down a billion-dollar corporation or destroy anyone who tried. "They didn't fire you because they thought you stole documents," Maya said. "They fired you because they were afraid of what you might have seen, what you might know." Maria's eyes widened. "So what do we do?" Maya looked at the memo, then at Maria, then at the small, struggling law office that was all she had. "We fight," she said. "We fight, and we win." Chapter 2. David versus Goliath. The next 3 months were a blur of research, preparation, and sleepless nights. Maya threw herself into the case with an intensity that worried her small staff. A paralegal named James, who had been with her since the beginning, and a part-time secretary named Dorothy, who was 67 years old and refused to retire. "You're going to kill yourself," James said one evening, finding Maya still at her desk at midnight. "Hartwell has 50 lawyers. 50. And unlimited resources. How are we supposed to compete with that?" "We compete by being smarter," Maya replied, not looking up from her documents. "By being more prepared, by caring more. Caring doesn't win cases. No, but evidence does." And evidence was what Maya was building. She tracked down other former Hartwell employees, people who had been fired under suspicious circumstances, people who had signed NDAs and been paid to stay quiet, people who were afraid to talk, but even more afraid of what would happen if they didn't. She found doctors who had prescribed Nexapril and noticed the side effects. She found families who had lost loved ones and been told it was natural causes. She found a paper trail that led from the research labs to the executive suite, documenting a systematic effort to hide the truth. But she also found something else: resistance. Witnesses who had agreed to testify suddenly changed their minds. Documents that should have been available through discovery were lost or misfiled. Her office was broken into twice, nothing taken but files disturbed, a message sent. And then there was Judge Harold Whitmore. When Maya learned that Whitmore had been assigned to the case, her heart sank. Harold Whitmore was 68 years old, a fixture of the Chicago legal establishment. He had been on the bench for 30 years, appointed by a governor who had later gone to prison for corruption. He was known for 2 things: his impatience with young lawyers and his favorable rulings for corporate defendants. Rumors swirled around him. Rumors of golf games with defense attorneys, of vacations paid for by unnamed benefactors, of a retirement fund that seemed far larger than a judge's salary could explain. But rumors weren't evidence, and Whitmore had survived every investigation, every complaint, every attempt to hold him accountable. "We need to file for recusal," James said when he heard the news. "Whitmore is in Hartwell's pocket, everyone knows it. And everyone knows that recusal motions against Whitmore always fail," Maya replied. "He's been accused a dozen times. Nothing ever sticks." "So, what do we do?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. "We prepare for war," she said finally. "We build a case so strong that even Whitmore can't ignore it. We make the evidence so overwhelming that ruling against us would be obvious corruption. And if he rules against us anyway, then we appeal. We go to the media. We make so much noise that they can't sweep this under the rug." James shook his head, but there was admiration in his eyes. "You really think we can win this?" Maya thought about Maria Santos, her tears, her fear, her desperate hope that someone would believe her. She thought about the 17 people who had died because a corporation valued profits over lives. She thought about every person who had ever been told they couldn't fight the system. "I think we have to try," she said, "because if we don't, who will? Before we continue, I want to hear from you. What do you think will happen when Maya faces Judge Whitmore? Do you think the system will let her win? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Chapter 3. The Courtroom. The trial began on a grey Monday morning in March. The Cook County Courthouse was a massive building, all marble and columns, and the weight of history. Maya had been here hundreds of times, but today felt different. Today, the stakes were higher than they had ever been. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case. The small-time lawyer taking on the pharmaceutical giant, the cleaning woman who had stumbled onto a deadly secret. Reporters filled the gallery. Activists held signs outside. Social media buzzed with speculation. And at the defense table sat the Hartwell legal team. There were 7 of them. 7 lawyers in suits that cost more than Maya's monthly rent, with briefcases full of motions and objections and procedural tricks designed to bury the truth under an avalanche of paperwork. At their head was Victor Kane, Hartwell's chief counsel, a man who had never lost a case and who looked at Maya like she was an insect to be crushed. "Miss Richardson," Kane said smoothly as they waited for the judge, "I admire your courage. Misguided, but admirable. There's still time to settle, you know. Save yourself the embarrassment." "I'll take my chances," Maya replied. Kane smiled, a cold, reptilian smile. "Your funeral." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harold Whitmore entered. He was a large man, with a red face and white hair, and the permanent scowl of someone who believed the world owed him deference. He settled into his chair like a king taking his throne, surveying the courtroom with obvious boredom. "Santos versus Hartwell Industries," he announced. "I've reviewed the filings. Miss Richardson, I have to say I'm not impressed. Your claims are ambitious." "The evidence will speak for itself, Your Honor," Maya said. Whitmore snorted. "We'll see about that. Mr. Kane, your opening statement." Victor Kane rose and delivered a masterful performance, 45 minutes of carefully crafted narrative that painted Hartwell as a victim of a disgruntled employee and an opportunistic lawyer. He spoke of Maria's history of disciplinary issues, fabricated, of Maya's pattern of frivolous lawsuits, non-existent, of the overwhelming evidence that would prove their innocence. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Maya had to admit it was effective. Then it was her turn. Maya stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. She thought about her mother, working 3 jobs to give her a chance. She thought about Maria, waiting in the gallery with her family. She thought about the 17 people who had died and the families who deserved answers. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "Mr. Kane just told you a story. A very polished, very expensive story, but that's all it was. A story. Fiction. Fantasy. She walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. "I'm going to tell you a different story, a true story. A story about a company that discovered their drug was killing people and decided to hide it. A story about executives who calculated that paying off lawsuits would be cheaper than recalling a dangerous product. A story about a cleaning woman who found a piece of paper in a trash can and had her entire life destroyed because of it." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Hartwell Industries wants you to believe that Maria Santos is a thief, that she's a liar, that she's making all of this up for money. But I'm going to show you the truth. I'm going to show you documents, testimony, and evidence that proves, beyond any doubt, that Hartwell knew their drug was dangerous and sold it anyway." Maya turned to look directly at Victor Kane, "And when I'm done, you'll understand why they're so desperate to silence her. Thank you, truly, thank you for staying with me this far. I promise you the best is yet to come. What happens next will change everything." The first week of trial was a battle of attrition. Maya called witness after witness, former Hartwell employees who testified about the pressure to meet sales targets, doctors who described the side effects they had observed, family members of victims who broke down in tears, describing their loved ones' final days. Each time, Victor Kane cross-examined with surgical precision. He attacked their credibility, their motives, their memories. He produced documents that contradicted their testimony. He suggested they had been coached, bribed, manipulated, and Judge Whitmore helped him at every turn. Objections that should have been overruled were sustained. Evidence that should have been admitted was excluded. Witnesses were cut off mid-sentence, their testimony stricken from the record for technical violations that Maya had never seen enforced before. "Your Honor, this is clearly relevant to—" Maya would begin. "Overruled, move on, Miss Richardson." But the witness hasn't finished." "I said move on. Do you want to be held in contempt?" By the end of the first week, Maya's case was in tatters. The jury looked confused, overwhelmed by the legal maneuvering. The reporters in the gallery were writing stories about the struggling plaintiff's attorney and the seemingly one-sided proceedings. Maria Santos sat in the gallery every day, her face growing more desperate with each setback. "They're going to win, aren't they?" she asked Maya one evening after court adjourned. "All those lawyers, all that money. We never had a chance." Maya took Maria's hands in hers. "We're not done yet," she said. "I have something they don't know about, something that's going to change everything." "What is it?" Maya hesitated. She had kept this secret for months, afraid that if anyone knew, it would be destroyed or suppressed like everything else. "Do you remember telling me about the night security guard? The one who was always kind to you?" Maria nodded. "Mr. Patterson. He retired last year. He always said hello, asked about my children." "I found him," Maya said. "And he had something. Something he's been holding on to for 2 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it." "What is it?" Maya looked around, making sure no one was listening. "A recording," she whispered. "A recording of a meeting between Hartwell's CEO and their chief scientist. A meeting where they discussed the deaths, the cover-up, everything. Mr. Patterson was working late one night, and he heard them talking. He recorded it on his phone through the door." Maria's eyes widened. Why didn't he come forward before? Because he was scared, because he knew what they would do to him. But when he heard about your case, when he saw what they were doing to you, he decided it was time. Will the judge allow it? Maya's jaw tightened. He'll have to. Because I'm not just going to play it in court. I'm going to make sure the whole world hears it. The second week of trial began with Victor Kane looking more confident than ever. He had spent the weekend preparing what he called his knockout punch, a motion to dismiss the case based on lack of evidence. He had compiled every ruling Whitmore had made in his favor, every piece of testimony that had been excluded, every setback Maya had suffered. "Your Honor," Kane said, rising with theatrical gravity, "the plaintiff has failed to present any credible evidence of wrongdoing. Their witnesses have been discredited. Their documents have been shown to be incomplete or misleading. I move for a directed verdict in favor of the defendant." Judge Whitmore nodded slowly, as if considering the motion carefully, but Maya could see the decision had already been made, the slight smile at the corner of his mouth, the way he avoided looking at the jury. "Miss Richardson," Whitmore said, "do you have any response to Mr. Kane's motion?" Maya stood. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. "I do, Your Honor. I have one more piece of evidence to present, evidence that I believe will be decisive." Kane laughed, actually laughed, out loud in open court. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The plaintiff has had weeks to present her case. She can't just—" "I have a recording," Maya interrupted. "A recording that was provided to me by a witness who feared for his safety. A recording that documents a conversation between Hartwell's CEO, Jonathan Hartwell III, and their chief scientist, Dr. Robert Chen. A conversation about Nexapril, about the deaths it caused, and about the decision to cover it up." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The jury sat up straight, suddenly alert. Victor Kane's face went pale. "Objection!" Kane shouted. "This evidence was never disclosed in discovery. It's inadmissible. It was provided to me 3 days ago," Maya said calmly. "I filed the appropriate notice this morning. The witness, Gerald Patterson, is prepared to testify about how he obtained it and to authenticate the recording." Judge Whitmore's face had gone from red to purple. His hands gripped the bench so hard his knuckles were white. "Miss Richardson," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "you cannot simply introduce new evidence in the middle of a trial. There are procedures, rules. This is highly irregular." "With respect, Your Honor, the rules allow for newly discovered evidence to be introduced when it is material to the case and when the delay in disclosure was not the fault of the presenting party. Mr. Patterson only came forward after seeing the trial coverage. I moved as quickly as possible to verify the recording and file the appropriate motions." "This is a trick," Kane sputtered. "A desperate ploy by a desperate lawyer. Your Honor, I demand that this so-called evidence be excluded." Whitmore looked at Kane, then at Maya, then at the packed gallery full of reporters and cameras. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he excluded the evidence without even hearing it, it would look like exactly what it was: a cover-up. The media would have a field day. His career, his reputation, everything he had built would be questioned. But if he allowed it— "I'll hear the recording," Whitmore said finally, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "But I reserve the right to rule on its admissibility after I've reviewed it." Maya nodded, hiding her relief. "Thank you, Your Honor. I call Gerald Patterson to the stand." Gerald Patterson was 71 years old, a retired security guard who had worked at Hartwell Industries for 23 years. He was a small man, with grey hair and thick glasses and the quiet dignity of someone who had spent his life doing honest work for modest pay. He walked to the witness stand slowly, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice was clear when he took the oath. "Mr. Patterson," Maya began, "can you tell the court how you came to make this recording?" Patterson nodded. "It was about 2 years ago. I was working the night shift at headquarters. Most everyone had gone home, but I saw lights on in the executive conference room. That was unusual. That room was hardly ever used after hours. What did you do?" "I went to check. Security protocol. When I got close, I heard voices, angry voices. I recognized one of them, Mr. Hartwell himself. I'd seen him around the building. though he never spoke to people like me. And the other voice? Dr. Chen, the head scientist. I'd seen him too, always in his lab coat, always looking worried about something. What did you hear them discussing? Victor Kane jumped to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. Your Honor, Maya said, the witness is testifying about what he personally observed. The recording itself is the evidence. Whitmore hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Overruled. Continue. Patterson took a deep breath. They were arguing about the drug, Nexapril. Dr. Chen was saying they had to stop selling it, that people were dying, that the FDA would find out eventually. And Mr. Hartwell. He paused, his face troubled by the memory. Mr. Hartwell said he didn't care. He said the lawsuits would cost less than a recall. He said they could pay off the families, bury the evidence, make it all go away. He said, and I remember this exactly, he said, dead people don't sue. Their families settle. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Several jurors looked physically ill. What did you do then? Maya asked. I took out my phone. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. I just felt like someone needed to know. I recorded about 4 minutes through the door before they stopped talking. Then I left. I was scared. I knew what they could do to me if they found out. Why didn't you come forward sooner? A. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. Because I was a coward. Because I had a pension, a family, a life I didn't want to lose. I told myself it wasn't my business, that someone else would expose them, that I didn't have to be the one. He looked at Maria Santos in the gallery. But then I saw what they did to that woman, a cleaning lady just like the people I worked with for 20 years. They destroyed her life because she found a piece of paper, and I realized, if I didn't speak up now, I was just as guilty as they were. Maya walked to her table and picked up a small device. Your Honor, I would like to play the recording for the court. Whitmore looked like he wanted to object, to find some reason to stop this, but the eyes of the world were on him. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were scribbling. History was being made. Proceed, he said, his voice barely audible. Maya pressed play. The audio quality wasn't perfect. There was static, background noise, the muffled quality of a recording made through a door. But the voices were clear enough. And the words were damning. 17 deaths, Jonathan. 17 that we know of. How many more that we don't? Keep your voice down, Robert. This is insane. We have to recall the drug. We have to tell the FDA. We're not telling anyone anything. Do you have any idea what a recall would cost? Billions. The stock would crash. The board would have my head. People are dying. People die every day. That's not our problem. Our problem is protecting this company, protecting our shareholders, protecting ourselves. I can't be part of this anymore. You're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. Unless you want to explain to your wife why you're suddenly unemployed and unemployable. Unless you want your name attached to every lawsuit, every investigation, every news story. I made you, Robert. I can unmake you just as easily. A long pause, then quietly, what do you want me to do? Destroy the trial data, all of it. Replace it with the modified results and find out who else knows, anyone who might talk. Handle them. Handle them how? Use your imagination. Retirement packages, transfers, whatever it takes. And if that doesn't work, then we'll find another way. Dead people don't sue, Robert. Their families settle. The recording ended. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Maya looked at the jury. Several were crying. One man had his head in his hands. A woman in the front row was staring at the Hartwell legal team with undisguised horror. She looked at Victor Kane, the legendary attorney, the man who had never lost a case. Looked like he had aged 10 years in 4 minutes. His face was grey, his hands were shaking. She looked at Judge Whitmore, and what she saw there surprised her. Fear, pure, naked fear. Because Whitmore knew something that the rest of the courtroom didn't. Something that Maya was about to reveal. "Your Honor," Maya said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I have one more piece of evidence to present. Evidence that explains why this case was assigned to your courtroom. Evidence that explains your rulings throughout this trial." Whitmore's face went white. "Miss Richardson, I warn you. I have bank records, Your Honor. Records showing payments from a Hartwell subsidiary to an offshore account. An account in your name." The courtroom exploded. What happened next would be discussed in law schools for decades. Judge Whitmore tried to call a recess, tried to clear the courtroom, tried to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond anything he could have imagined. But it was too late. The cameras had captured everything. The reporters had heard everything. The truth was out, and no amount of judicial authority could put it back in the box. Federal marshals arrived within the hour. Whitmore was escorted from the bench, his judicial robes a mockery of the justice he had spent 30 years corrupting. He would later be charged with bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, charges that would result in a 15-year prison sentence. Victor Kane tried to salvage the situation, calling for a mistrial, arguing that the evidence had been improperly obtained, that his client's rights had been violated. But the new judge, appointed on an emergency basis, was having none of it. "Mr. Kane," Judge Patricia Okonkwo said, her voice cold with contempt, "your client conspired to hide evidence of deaths caused by their product. They destroyed documents, they intimidated witnesses, they bribed a federal judge, and you're asking me to throw out the case on a technicality?" Kane had no response. The trial resumed, but it was a formality now. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts: wrongful termination, fraud, conspiracy, negligent homicide. The damages were historic. $7 billion, the largest verdict against a pharmaceutical company in American history, but the legal consequences were just the beginning. Jonathan Hartwell III was arrested the following week, charged with 17 counts of involuntary manslaughter and a litany of federal crimes. Dr. Robert Chen turned state's evidence, providing testimony that would implicate dozens of executives, scientists and lawyers in the cover-up. The FDA launched a full investigation, resulting in the recall of Nexapril and 3 other Hartwell drugs that had been approved using falsified data. Congressional hearings were scheduled, new regulations were proposed, the entire pharmaceutical industry was put on notice. And Maria Santos got her life back. The immigration investigation was dropped. Her record was cleared. She received a settlement that would ensure her family's security for generations. But more than that, she received something that money couldn't buy: vindication. The world knew she had been telling the truth. The world knew she had been wronged. The world knew she had been brave enough to fight back. On the day the verdict was announced, Maria found Maya in the hallway outside the courtroom. Both women were crying. "Thank you," Maria said, embracing her lawyer. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for fighting for me." Maya held her tight. "Thank you for being brave enough to come forward. Thank you for not giving up." "What happens now?" Maria asked. Maya smiled through her tears. Now we make sure this never happens again. Now we use this victory to help others. Now we show the world that the system can work, if there are people willing to fight for it." 6 months after the verdict, Maya Richardson stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with lawmakers, journalists, and advocates, all gathered to witness the signing of the Pharmaceutical Accountability Act, a sweeping reform bill that had been inspired by the Hartwell case. The bill required greater transparency in drug trials, harsher penalties for cover-ups, and new protections for whistleblowers. Maya had been invited to speak, to share the story that had sparked a national conversation about corporate accountability and justice. 2 years ago, she began, a cleaning woman found a piece of paper in a trash can. That piece of paper led to the exposure of one of the largest corporate cover-ups in American history. It led to justice for 17 families who lost loved ones. It led to the law we're signing today. She paused, looking out at the audience. But I want to be clear about something. Maria Santos didn't bring down Hartwell Industries. I didn't bring down Hartwell Industries. The truth brought down Hartwell Industries. The truth and the courage of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. She thought about Gerald Patterson, the security guard who had risked everything to come forward, about the doctors and scientists who had testified despite threats to their careers, about the families who had shared their grief with the world so that others might be spared. The powerful want us to believe that we can't fight them, that the system is rigged, that money and connections will always win, and sometimes they're right, sometimes the system fails, sometimes justice is denied. Her voice grew stronger, but not always, not when ordinary people stand together, not when the truth finds a way to be heard, not when we refuse to accept that some lives matter less than profits. She looked directly into the cameras. To anyone watching this who has been told they don't have a case, who has been laughed at by judges and lawyers and people in power, who has been told to give up, to settle, to accept injustice as the price of living in this world, Maya smiled. Don't believe them. Fight. Find your evidence. Tell your truth. Because the powerful are only powerful as long as we let them be. And the moment we stop being afraid, the moment we stand up and demand justice, that's the moment everything changes. The room erupted in applause. 1 year later, Maya Richardson opened the doors to her new office. It was a far cry from the struggling storefront on the south side, a full floor in a downtown high-rise with a staff of 20 lawyers and a waiting list of clients that stretched for months. The Richardson Legal Foundation had become one of the most respected public interest law firms in the country, taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch, fighting battles that other firms considered unwinnable. But some things hadn't changed. Maya still took pro bono cases, still mentored young lawyers from underserved communities, still answered her own phone when she could, still remembered what it felt like to be the underdog, still carried the fire that had driven her from the beginning. On this particular morning, she had a visitor. Gerald Patterson sat in her office, looking healthier and happier than he had during the trial. Retirement suited him. He had used his share of the whistleblower reward to buy a small house in Florida, where he spent his days fishing and playing with his grandchildren. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, "for giving me the chance to do the right thing, for making my testimony matter." "You're the one who made it matter," Maya replied. "You kept that recording for 2 years. You came forward when it counted. That took courage." Patterson shook his head. "I was scared every day. Still am. Sometimes. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking they're going to come for me. They can't touch you now. The people who would have come for you are in prison. I know. But fear doesn't always listen to logic." He paused, studying her face. "How do you do it? How do you keep fighting, knowing what you're up against?" Maya thought about the question. It was one she had been asked many times, in interviews and speeches, and quiet conversations like this one. "Because I've seen what happens when no one fights," she said finally. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people accepted injustice because they thought they had no choice, where mothers worked themselves to death and fathers disappeared into prisons, and children grew up believing the system would never be on their side." She looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. "I fight because someone has to. Because every case we win, every corrupt official we expose, every corporation we hold accountable, it proves that the system can work. It gives people hope. And hope is the most powerful weapon we have. Patterson nodded slowly. You really believe that? That things can change? Maya smiled. I have to believe it, because the alternative is giving up. And I've never been very good at giving up. That afternoon, Maya's assistant knocked on her door. There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Maya looked up from her paperwork. Who is it? A young woman. She seems scared. She says she has information about a cover-up at a major tech company, something about user data being sold to foreign governments. Maya felt the familiar spark ignite in her chest, the spark that had driven her through the Hartwell case, through every battle she had ever fought. Send her in. The woman who entered was young, mid-20s, Maya guessed, with dark circles under her eyes and the hunted look of someone who had seen too much. She clutched a laptop bag like it contained something precious. Miss Richardson, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm a software engineer at Prometheus Technologies, and I have evidence that they've been selling user data to the Chinese government. Millions of Americans, their locations, their messages, their financial information, everything. Maya gestured to a chair. Sit down, Sarah. Tell me everything. As Sarah began to speak, Maya felt the weight of another impossible case settling onto her shoulders, another David versus Goliath battle, another fight against money and power and a system designed to protect the guilty. But she also felt something else, purpose, meaning, the knowledge that this was exactly what she was meant to do. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, millions of people going about their days, trusting that someone was watching out for them, that someone would fight for them when they couldn't fight for themselves. Maya Richardson was that someone, and she was just getting started. You have no case. 4 words that were meant to crush Maya Richardson, to send her back to her struggling law office, to prove that the system would always protect the powerful. But Maya didn't hear those words as a verdict. She heard them as a challenge, and she answered that challenge with evidence, with courage, with the unshakable belief that truth, eventually, always finds a way. Judge Harold Whitmore is serving 15 years in federal prison. He will be 83 when he is released, if he survives that long. His legacy, built over 3 decades, has been reduced to a cautionary tale about the price of corruption. Jonathan Hartwell III received a 25-year sentence. His company, once worth billions, was broken up and sold. The Hartwell name, once synonymous with pharmaceutical innovation, is now synonymous with corporate greed and criminal negligence. The 17 families who lost loved ones to Nexapril received justice, not just financial compensation, but the acknowledgement that their loved ones' deaths mattered, that someone had been held accountable, that the system had finally worked. And Maria Santos went back to work, not as a cleaning woman, though she says she wouldn't have been ashamed to do so, but as a patient advocate at a community health clinic. She helps people navigate the medical system, fights for their rights, makes sure they're not taken advantage of by the institutions that are supposed to help them. She says Maya Richardson taught her that one person can make a difference, that standing up for what's right is never a waste of time, even when the odds seem impossible. Maya would say Maria taught her the same thing. What would you do if the entire system was against you? What would you do if a judge laughed at your case, if the most powerful lawyers in the country lined up against you, if everyone told you to give up? Maya Richardson answered that question in a Chicago courtroom with a recording that changed everything. She proved that evidence matters, that truth matters, that courage matters. She proved that the powerful are only powerful as long as we let them be. And she proved that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the good guys win. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We tell stories like this every week, stories about ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been told they don't have a case. Someone who's been laughed at by people in power. Someone who's thinking about giving up. Tell them Maya Richardson's story. Tell them the truth always finds a way. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. Thank you for being here. Until next time.